The morning sun breaks through the dense jungle canopy as a man emerges from a simple shelter made of palm leaves and wooden poles. His dark skin glistens with a mixture of sweat and natural oils as he stretches, surveying the pristine beach that separates his home from the endless blue of the Indian Ocean. In his hand, a bow crafted from the island's flexible wood. On his waist, a simple belt adorned with shells and plant fibers. This man is one of the last people on Earth who has never known electricity, modern medicine, or even agriculture. If you're using these to fall asleep, that's literally why I make them, so subscribe maybe, and tell me, where are you and what time? I check comments and it's like Berlin at breakfast, Boston at bedtime, all at once. Welcome to North Sentinel Island, home to the most isolated tribe in the world. Imagine living your entire life on an island just 23 square miles in size, about a third the size of Manhattan, never leaving, never seeing the outside world, never even knowing there is an outside world beyond what occasionally washes up on your shores. This isn't a thought experiment or a historical scenario. This is the reality for the Sentinelese people right now in our modern world of satellites, smartphones, and space travel. For an estimated 55,000 years, the Sentinelese have inhabited this tiny island in the Bay of Bengal, rejecting all sustained contact with outsiders. Their isolation is so complete that we know more about some distant planets than we do about their daily lives. The few glimpses we've had reveal a people living much as our ancestors did thousands of years ago, hunting with bows and arrows, fishing in shallow waters, and gathering wild plants for food and medicine. Yet they're not ancient relics. They're our contemporaries, living parallel to our modern world but completely separate from it. But how is such isolation even possible in today's interconnected world? North Sentinel Island is part of the Andaman Islands, which belong to India. The Indian government has established a strict exclusion zone of 3 nautical miles around the island. No one is allowed to approach, photograph, or attempt contact with the inhabitants. This policy isn't just to respect the Sentinelese desire for isolation. It's also to protect them from diseases to which they have no immunity. The tribe's fierce defense of their homeland has been well documented. Arrows have greeted nearly every attempted approach, from colonial expeditions to modern helicopters. In 2018, American missionary John Allen Chow paid fishermen to take him to the Forbidden Island in hopes of converting the tribe to Christianity. He was killed almost immediately upon landing. More recently, in 2025, a social media influencer who briefly landed on the island was arrested by Indian authorities before he could encounter any tribe members. But what do we actually know about how these people live? From aerial surveys and the few peaceful encounters in the early 1990s, anthropologists estimate the Sentinelese population to be between 50 and 150 individuals. They appear to be of average height for hunter-gatherers, between 5'3" and 5'5", with strong, muscular builds and extremely dark skin that's been described as shining black. Their hair is typically short and curly, and both men and women wear minimal clothing, usually just decorative belts, headbands, and necklaces made from plant fibers. Unlike many isolated peoples who have been devastated by contact with outsiders, the Sentinelese appear to be thriving. Observers have noted numerous children and pregnant women during brief glimpses of the tribe, suggesting a healthy, sustainable population. The island itself is a perfect microcosm, a self-contained world with everything the tribe needs to survive. Dense forests cover most of the interior, providing shelter, building materials, and hunting grounds. The surrounding coral reefs create a natural barrier against large predators while supplying rich fishing grounds. But life on North Sentinel is far from a tropical paradise. The Sentinelese face daily challenges that would overwhelm most modern humans. Their hunter-gatherer existence means they're constantly searching for food, a quest that comes with significant risks. When not fishing or hunting wild pigs that inhabit the island, they must gather fruits, roots, and other edible plants from the dense jungle. Each day brings the possibility of injury, animal attacks, or poisoning from toxic plants. Without modern medicine, even minor infections or injuries can become life-threatening. Weather poses another constant threat. During monsoon season, fierce storms batter the island. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands across the region also struck North Sentinel, raising the land by several feet and destroying the shallow lagoons where the tribe fished. Yet somehow they adapted and survived. When Indian officials flew helicopters over the island to check on them after the disaster, they were met with the usual greeting, a volley of arrows. The Sentinelese relationship with the ocean is particularly fascinating. They build narrow outrigger canoes used only in the shallow waters around the island. Unlike other indigenous peoples of the Andaman Islands, they don't venture into deep water, propelling their vessels with long poles rather than paddles. This limitation has been crucial to maintaining their isolation. They've never developed the seafaring technology that would allow them to leave their island home. One aspect of Sentinelese life that's particularly intriguing is their relationship with metal. The tribe has no metallurgy of their own. They can't mine or forge metal, yet their arrows have metal tips. How? They've learned to salvage and cold forge metal from shipwrecks. In 1981, a cargo ship called the Primrose ran aground on the island's reef during a storm. The crew, terrified at the sight of armed tribesmen building canoes to reach them, radioed for emergency evacuation. Helicopters rescued all 31 crewmen, but the ship remained. Photographs years later showed the Sentinelese scavenging the wreck for metal. What must it have been like for them to explore that vessel? Imagine encountering objects completely alien to your experience. Polished metal fixtures, glass windows, plastic containers, synthetic fabrics. Did they see it as a gift from the gods, a curiosity from another world, or simply a useful resource to be harvested? This scavenging shows something remarkable about the Sentinelese. They're not static relics of the past. They adapt. They incorporate useful elements from the outside world while maintaining their core way of life and isolation. Their rejection of sustained contact isn't due to ignorance, but to deliberate choice. And perhaps they have good reason. The history of the other indigenous peoples of the Andaman Islands serves as a cautionary tale. The great Andamanese, who once numbered several thousand across multiple tribes, were decimated by diseases, alcohol, and displacement after British colonization in the 1800s. Today, fewer than 100 remain, and their traditional way of life is largely lost. The Jarawa tribe, genetic cousins to the Sentinelese who live on a nearby island, maintained their isolation until the 1990s. Since opening to outside contact, they've faced exploitation, alcoholism, sexual abuse, and disease. Some tour companies even organized human safaris, where tourists could throw food to Jarawa people like animals in a zoo. By comparison, the Sentinelese health and autonomy seem remarkable. When anthropologists caught rare glimpses of them during peaceful encounters in the early 1990s, they appeared to be in excellent physical condition, strong, agile, and free from the obesity and chronic diseases that plague modern societies. Their days follow the rhythms of nature rather than clocks or calendars. They rise with the sun and retire at sunset. Their activities are dictated by necessity: hunting, gathering, fishing, tool-making, and perhaps by cultural practices we can only imagine. Do they tell stories around evening fires? Do they have music, dance, or art? What spiritual beliefs guide their understanding of the world? These questions remain unanswered because the Sentinelese have made their wishes clear. They want to be left alone. And that brings us to perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Sentinelese. They are a people who have repeatedly, forcefully rejected the outside world. In a global society that values connection, progress, and technology, they have chosen isolation, tradition, and self-sufficiency. Their existence challenges our assumptions about what humans need and want. They are simultaneously our most distant ancestors and our contemporary neighbors, a living reminder of where we all came from, and perhaps a warning about where we're going. For the Sentinelese, life continues as it has for thousands of years. The man with the bow returns to his shelter as evening approaches. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges: finding food, maintaining shelter, crafting tools, raising children. No internet, no electricity, no written language, just the immediate reality of survival on their island home. But change is coming, whether they know it or not. Rising sea levels threaten to shrink their already small territory. Illegal poachers and curious adventurers continue to breach the exclusion zone, despite the dangers and prohibitions. The modern world presses closer every year. The story of the Sentinelese is still being written, not by anthropologists or journalists, but by the tribe themselves as they continue their remarkable existence on the edge of our understanding. They remain one of humanity's last great mysteries, a people who choose to live beyond the reach of our increasingly connected world. What's even more remarkable is how they've maintained this isolation despite numerous attempts at contact. In the next part, we'll explore what a typical day might look like for members of this mysterious tribe, based on the limited observations we've been able to make from a distance. Dawn breaks over North Sentinel Island. The first rays of sunlight filter through the dense jungle canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. A Sentinelese man stirs from his sleep on the hard-packed earth. No alarm clock wakes him, no coffee brews, just the ancient rhythm of daylight that has governed human lives for millennia. His home is nothing like what we'd recognize as a house. The Sentinelese build two types of dwellings: large communal huts with room for several families and smaller temporary shelters closer to the beach. This man sleeps in one of the larger structures, a simple design of 4 wooden poles supporting a slanted roof thatched with palm leaves. No walls, no windows, no doors, just an open space protected from rain and harsh sun. He rises and stretches, his muscular frame evidence of a life spent in constant physical activity. Unlike us, he doesn't shower or brush his teeth. Personal hygiene looks different when you've never seen a bathroom. Instead, he might rinse in a freshwater stream that cuts through the island, or perhaps the ocean itself. Breakfast isn't waiting in a refrigerator. If he wants to eat, he needs to find food, today and every day. The uncertainty of where your next meal comes from shapes everything about life on North Sentinel Island. Aerial photographs have shown the sentinelese forming small groups to hunt and gather throughout the day. They likely follow patterns established over countless generations, dividing labor based on age, strength, and gender. Men typically handle hunting and fishing, while women might focus more on gathering fruits, tubers, and other plant foods. The man grabs his bow and a handful of arrows tipped with salvaged metal, probably scavenged from the Primrose shipwreck or other debris that has washed ashore over the years. The arrows are marvels of resourcefulness, with carefully shaped metal points attached to wooden shafts, with plant fibers and resins. He tucks a small dagger-like tool into his waistband, the only clothing he wears besides decorative bands around his head and neck. He joins several other men from the settlement. Together, they head into the jungle in search of wild boar. Hunting on a small island comes with unique challenges. The limited space means game can quickly become scarce if overhunted. The sentinelese have somehow maintained this delicate balance for thousands of years. Their hunting technique likely involves tracking, stealth, and patience. Unlike modern hunters with high-powered rifles, they need to get close enough for their arrows to be lethal. One wrong step, one snapped twig, and dinner disappears into the underbrush. Hours might pass before they spot their prey. The men communicate with subtle hand gestures and facial expressions, positioning themselves strategically. Finally, an opportunity, a wild boar foraging in a small clearing. The hunters draw their bows in perfect synchrony, a skill honed from childhood. The arrows fly. If the hunt is successful, they'll carry the kill back to the settlement for butchering. Nothing goes to waste. Meat provides essential protein. Bones become tools. Hides might be used for storage or shelter. Even the skull has value. Archaeological observations have noted piles of boar skulls near sentinelese settlements, suggesting possible ritual significance. Meanwhile, women and children focus on gathering. The island's tropical environment offers a wealth of edible plants, coconuts, fruits, berries, roots, and tubers. We know from similar hunter-gatherer societies that the plant foods gathered by women often provide the majority of calories for the group, despite hunting getting more attention. For children, these gathering expeditions are also educational, learning which plants are safe, which are poisonous, where they grow, and when they're in season. No textbooks, no formal lessons, just vital knowledge passed through observation and participation. By midday, the heat becomes oppressive. Activity might slow as the tribe seeks shade. This could be time for tool maintenance, resharpening stone implements, binding new arrowheads, weaving baskets, or repairing fishing nets. Every item they use must be created from materials found on their island or salvaged from the sea. Their technological adaptability is remarkable. When a National Geographic team left aluminum cookware on the beach in 1974, the sentinelese quickly incorporated this new material into their toolkit. They didn't reject it as foreign or mysterious. They recognized useful material when they saw it. Afternoon brings a shift to the water. Fishing is a crucial food source, and the coral reefs surrounding North Sentinel Island teem with marine life. The sentinelese build narrow outrigger canoes, so narrow you can barely place 2 feet side by side in them. Unlike other boats, these aren't propelled with paddles, but with long poles pushed against the seafloor, limiting them to shallow waters. Fishing techniques might include spearing, bow fishing, or using plant-based poisons to stun fish in tide pools. They've also been observed collecting shellfish from the reef, crabs, mollusks, and other easy-to-harvest seafood. Turtle eggs, when in season, provide another valuable food source. What's fascinating is how their isolation has shaped their relationship with the ocean. Unlike other Andamanese tribes who developed seafaring skills, the Sentinelese never ventured far from their shores. Their boats and fishing methods work perfectly for their immediate needs, but don't allow for exploration or migration. This self-limitation has been key to maintaining their isolation. As afternoon fades toward evening, the community reconvenes. Food is shared communally, a necessary practice in societies where successful hunting or gathering can't be guaranteed every day. Some days bring abundance, others scarcity. Sharing ensures everyone survives the lean times. Meal preparation is basic but effective. Without pottery or metal cookware, they likely cook directly over fire, perhaps roasting meat on spits or wrapping food in leaves to steam. Some foods would be eaten raw. Fire itself is precious. Since they don't appear to have fire-starting technology, they must keep embers burning continuously, protecting them from rain and wind. Evening brings a different rhythm to the settlement. As daylight fades, activities turn more social. This is when cultural practices we can only guess at might take place. Storytelling, music, dancing, or rituals. Anthropologists have observed Sentinelese women dancing by slapping both palms on the thighs while simultaneously tapping the feet rhythmically in a bent knee stance. One of the few cultural practices we've been able to document. Do they have musical instruments, possibly simple drums or rattles made from natural materials? Do they sing? Almost certainly, music in some form appears in every human culture ever studied. What tales do they tell around their fires? What gods or spirits do they worship? These questions remain unanswered, part of the mystery that surrounds this remarkable people. What about family structure? From limited observations, anthropologists believe the Sentinelese likely form nuclear family units within larger communal groups. Children seem to stay close to their mothers when young, but are given significant freedom to explore and learn as they grow older. Cycle of hunter-gatherer societies where independence is valued early. Romantic relationships, marriage customs, these remain complete mysteries. We simply don't know if they practice monogamy, polygamy, or some other arrangement. We don't know how they choose partners or what ceremonies might mark these unions. As night falls completely, activity winds down. Without artificial light, their day largely ends with sunset. Sleep comes early, on simple platforms or directly on the ground. Some might stay awake longer, tending fires or keeping watch. The sounds of the jungle, insects, birds, the distant crash of waves form the soundtrack to their dreams. Their sleep is different from ours too. Without the constant stimulation of screens and artificial light, they likely follow more natural sleep patterns, perhaps falling asleep earlier, waking occasionally through the night, and rising with the sun. Some anthropologists believe this biphasic or segmented sleep pattern was the norm for humans before artificial lighting changed our habits. One aspect of Sentinelese life that sets them apart from many other indigenous peoples is their complete lack of agriculture. They don't plant crops or keep domesticated animals. Everything they eat must be hunted, fished, or gathered fresh. This pure hunter-gatherer lifestyle has become extraordinarily rare in our world. Their health reflects this lifestyle. From the limited observations we have, the Sentinelese appear remarkably fit, muscular, lean, and agile. Their diet of wild foods, constant physical activity, and absence of processed foods or alcohol likely protects them from many of the chronic diseases that plague modern societies. But this comes with trade-offs: higher infant mortality, vulnerability to infections, and shorter average lifespans than we enjoy. What about language? The Sentinelese speak a language that remains completely unclassified by linguists. We don't know a single word of it. Attempts by members of other Andamanese tribes to communicate with them failed. Their languages aren't mutually intelligible, despite geographic proximity. Their linguistic isolation is as complete as their physical isolation. This isolation extends to their knowledge of the world. The Sentinelese worldview is confined to their island and what they can see from its shores. The concepts of continents, countries, or even other islands beyond the horizon simply don't exist in their understanding. The world for them is North Sentinel Island. Yet they're acutely aware of the threat outsiders pose. This awareness likely comes from cultural memory, stories passed down through generations about the dangers of strange people from beyond the sea. Perhaps these stories began with early colonial encounters, when the British kidnapped some of their people, resulting in deaths from disease. The trauma of those events may have been encoded into their cultural DNA, reinforcing their hostility toward outsiders. Their days follow a pattern that would be recognizable to our ancestors thousands of years ago. Wake, hunt, gather, eat, socialize, sleep, repeat. The basics of survival consume most of their time and energy, yet within this seemingly simple framework exists a complex cultural system: language, social rules, knowledge, spirituality, and identity. As night fully envelops the island, our glimpse into their day ends. The Sentinelese sleep, unaware that millions of people across the world wonder about their lives, debate their future, and romanticize their isolation. To them, there is only the island, the sea, and occasionally strange visitors who are best kept away. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same routines, but perhaps different outcomes. Maybe the hunt will fail. Maybe a storm will prevent fishing. Maybe a child will be born, or an elder will die. The rhythm of life continues as it has for thousands of years on this tiny island. The last places on Earth untouched by the modern world. But this isolation hasn't always been perfect. Throughout history, outsiders have attempted to breach the Sentinelese bubble, sometimes with devastating consequences. In our next section, we'll explore these intrusions and how they've shaped the tribe's relationship with the outside world. Imagine living your entire life on an island paradise, never seeing anyone but your own people. Then, one day, monsters emerge from the sea. That's essentially what happened to the Sentinelese when outsiders first appeared on their shores. These strange visitors looked different, spoke incomprehensibly, carried unknown objects, and arrived in vessels larger than anything the islanders had ever seen. How terrifying that must have been. The first documented encounter came in 1867 when an Indian merchant vessel called the Nineveh ran aground on North Sentinel's Reef during a monsoon. The 106 passengers and crew made it safely to shore. For 2 days, nothing happened. The Sentinelese simply watched from a distance, likely assessing these bizarre intruders. Then, on the third morning, as the castaways prepared breakfast, the tribe attacked with arrows, probably tipped with salvaged metal they'd scavenged from previous shipwrecks. Somehow, the crew managed to fight them off using sticks and stones until a Royal Navy rescue party arrived days later. What triggered the attack? We'll never know. Perhaps the shipwrecked crew ventured too close to a sacred site. Maybe they unwittingly violated some tribal taboo, or perhaps the Sentinelese were simply defending their home against invaders, something they've continued to do with remarkable consistency for over 150 years. But the most infamous and devastating contact came in 1880, courtesy of a British naval officer named Maurice Vidal Portman. Serving as the officer in charge of the Andamanese, Portman was a strange figure even by colonial standards, a man with an unhealthy obsession with measuring and photographing the indigenous peoples of the Andaman Islands. When Portman first landed on North Sentinel with an armed expedition, he found only abandoned villages. The Sentinelese had melted into the forest at the first sign of strangers, a defensive tactic they still employ today. For days, Portman's men searched the island until they finally captured 6 Sentinelese, an elderly couple and 4 children. Portman took these captives to Port Blair, the colonial capital on South Andaman Island. His intentions were supposedly scientific, to study these primitive people and introduce them to civilization. What followed was nothing short of a tragedy. The elderly couple quickly fell ill and died. Disease has been the greatest killer of indigenous peoples throughout colonization, and the Sentinelese had no immunity to the pathogens of the outside world. Seeing the adults die and the children sickening, Portman hastily returned the 4 children to North Sentinel Island, along with a pile of gifts, as if trinkets could compensate for their ordeal. Those 4 children, carrying whatever illnesses they'd been exposed to, likely spread disease throughout the small island population. We'll never know how many Sentinelese died as a result of Portman's scientific expedition. What we do know is that this event likely cemented the tribe's hostile attitude toward outsiders. Portman himself later admitted that his expedition increased their general terror of and hostility to all comers. That's quite the understatement from a man who effectively kidnapped people, caused deaths, and potentially unleashed an epidemic on an isolated population. For nearly a century after Portman's disastrous visit, the Sentinelese were largely left alone. Then, in 1967, the Indian government, now in control of the Andaman Islands after independence, began a series of contact expeditions led by anthropologist Triloknath Pandit. The first expedition found only abandoned settlements. Subsequent visits in the 1970s saw the Sentinelese retreat into the forest or fire arrows at the boats. The Indian anthropologists took a different approach than their colonial predecessors. They didn't attempt to capture anyone. Instead, they dropped gifts, coconuts, bananas, iron tools, and retreated to a safe distance. In 1974, a National Geographic film crew accompanied one of these expeditions for a documentary titled Man in Search of Man. The encounter didn't go well. When the team tried to land and leave gifts, the Sentinelese fired arrows. One struck the film's director in the thigh. Footage from this expedition gave the outside world its first glimpse of the Sentinelese and demonstrated their clear desire to be left alone. The gift-dropping missions continued sporadically, with mixed reactions from the tribe. Sometimes they would accept the offerings, other times they would bury them in the sand, and occasionally they would take the gifts and then immediately fire arrows at the retreating boats. Then came the Primrose Incident of 1981, perhaps the most dramatic encounter between the Sentinelese and the modern world. The MV Primrose, a 16,000-ton freighter carrying chicken feed from Bangladesh to Australia, ran aground on North Sentinel's Reef during a storm on August 2nd. The 31 crew members were stranded but in no immediate danger as the ship remained intact on the reef. For a few days, nothing happened. Then a young crew member spotted movement on the shore. People were emerging from the forest, small, naked figures carrying spears, bows, and arrows. They began building canoes, clearly intending to reach the stranded vessel. The terrified captain, Liu Chunglong, sent an urgent message to the shipping company in Hong Kong. Wild men, estimate more than 50, carrying various homemade weapons, are making 2 or 3 wooden boats, worrying they will board us at sunset. All crew members' lives not guaranteed. He didn't ask for evacuation. Instead, he requested an airdrop of weapons. That's how serious the threat appeared. Rough seas prevented the Sentinelese from reaching the ship, and after several tense days, the crew was evacuated by helicopter. The Primrose remained where it ran aground, becoming a source of metal for the tribe. Later, aerial photographs showed the Sentinelese salvaging material from the wreck. Think about that encounter from the Sentinelese perspective. A massive steel structure appears on your reef overnight, filled with strange people and incomprehensible objects. Would you see it as a threat, an opportunity, a sign from the gods? Their response, cautious observation followed by preparation for confrontation, suggests they viewed it primarily as a danger. The gift-dropping missions reached a surprising turning point in January 1991. When Pandit's team arrived that day, something unprecedented happened. Instead of hiding or shooting arrows, the Sentinelese waded into the water to collect coconuts directly from the hands of the anthropologists. A second peaceful contact occurred in February. The team even photographed several Sentinelese at close range, images that remain some of the clearest we have of the tribe. Yet even during these friendly encounters, the islanders maintained clear boundaries. They wouldn't allow the visitors to enter the forest or approach their settlements. Why did the Sentinelese suddenly become more receptive after decades of hostility? Perhaps they were curious. Perhaps they'd come to associate these particular visitors with useful gifts. Or perhaps, as some anthropologists have suggested, the regular visits had depleted their natural resources, making them more dependent on the offerings. Whatever the reason, the friendliness didn't last. Later that same year, the Sentinelese resumed their hostile stance, firing arrows at contact teams. By 1996, the Indian government officially abandoned the contact missions. They adopted a new policy: no deliberate contact, only periodic checks from a distance to ensure the tribe's welfare. The wisdom of this approach became tragically clear in 2006 when 2 Indian fishermen, Sundar Raj and Pandit Tiwari, were killed after their boat drifted onto North Sentinel Island. They had been illegally fishing for mud crabs near the island and fell asleep, allowing their anchor to slip. The Sentinelese attacked them with axes and buried their bodies on the beach. When the Indian Coast Guard attempted to retrieve the bodies by helicopter, they were met with a barrage of arrows. The operation was abandoned. Indian officials made the difficult but rational decision not to prosecute the killings, recognizing that the Sentinelese were simply defending their territory according to their own laws. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that devastated coastal communities across the region also struck North Sentinel Island. Remarkably, the Sentinelese survived with apparently minimal casualties. When Indian authorities flew helicopters over the island to check on them after the disaster, they were greeted with the usual response: arrows fired skyward. The tsunami dramatically altered the island's geography, raising it by several feet and expanding its size through the merging of smaller islets. The coral reefs that provided fishing grounds were exposed to air and destroyed, yet somehow the Sentinelese adapted to these dramatic changes without outside assistance. Their resilience is remarkable, but it doesn't make them invulnerable. The greatest threat they face isn't natural disasters, but the diseases carried by outsiders. A single encounter with an infected visitor could unleash a pandemic that could wipe out the entire tribe. Their small population and genetic homogeneity make them especially vulnerable to infectious diseases. This vulnerability was brutally demonstrated in the history of other Andamanese tribes. The Great Andamanese, who once numbered around 5,000 across 10 distinct tribes, were reduced to fewer than 100 individuals after contact with British colonizers. Disease, alcoholism, and exploitation decimated their population. Today, only about 50 remain, their traditional lifestyle and many of their languages lost forever. The Jarawa tribe, who live on the main Andaman island, maintained their isolation until the 1990s. Since opening to outside contact, they've faced exploitation, sexual abuse, and the degradation of their cultural practices. Tour operators created human safaris where tourists would throw food to Jarawa people by the roadside as if they were animals in a zoo. Given these cautionary tales, the Sentinelese hostility toward outsiders seems not just understandable, but wise. Their isolation isn't primitive stubbornness. It's a survival strategy that has worked for thousands of years. The most recent and infamous intrusion came in November 2018, when American missionary John Allen Chau attempted to convert the Sentinelese to Christianity. Despite knowing the dangers and legal prohibitions, the 26-year-old paid local fishermen to take him near the island. In his diary, he described the island as Satan's last stronghold. Chau made several attempts to approach the Sentinelese. On his first visit, they shot an arrow that pierced his Bible. Undeterred, he returned the next day. In his final diary entry, he wrote, "I don't want to die. Would it be wiser to leave and let someone else continue? No. I think I could be more useful alive. I'll continue." He was killed shortly after reaching the island on his final attempt. The fisherman reported seeing the Sentinelese dragging his body along the beach. Indian authorities made several unsuccessful attempts to retrieve his remains before abandoning the effort, recognizing that further intrusions would only endanger both outsiders and the tribe. Chau's death sparked global debate about missionary work, indigenous rights, and the ethics of forced contact. Many criticized his recklessness, noting that even if he hadn't been killed, his presence could have introduced diseases that might have wiped out the entire tribe. Most recently, in March 2025, an American social media influencer named Mikhailo Viktorovich Polyakov illegally landed on North Sentinel Island for a few minutes, hoping to gain followers by documenting his adventure. Though he didn't encounter any Sentinelese, he left a can of cola and a coconut as offerings before being arrested by Indian authorities. His thoughtless stunt could have had devastating consequences for the tribe. These incidents highlight the ongoing threat that outside curiosity poses to the Sentinelese. Despite legal protections and the clear dangers, people continue to be drawn to this last isolated tribe, whether from religious zeal, anthropological interest, or simple thrill-seeking. For the Sentinelese, these intrusions must seem increasingly frequent and bewildering. From their perspective, strange beings occasionally emerge from the sea or descend from the sky, leave objects on their beaches, and sometimes try to approach them. Their consistent response, defensive hostility, has served them well so far. But for how much longer can they maintain this isolation? Their island is visible on Google Earth. Tourists visit the nearby Andaman Islands in growing numbers. Fishing boats regularly pass within sight of their shores. The modern world presses closer every year. Yet, somehow, against all odds, the Sentinelese have preserved not just their physical isolation, but their cultural independence. In a world where indigenous cultures have been systematically erased or assimilated, they remain sovereign, a people who have repeatedly forcefully rejected the outside world's advances. As we leave behind the history of outside intrusions, let's turn our attention to what little we know about the Sentinelese culture, their tools, traditions, and potential beliefs that have sustained them through millennia of isolation. When you look at photographs of the Sentinelese, the few clear images we have, what strikes you isn't their primitiveness, but their humanity. Their faces show the same range of emotions we all experience: curiosity, suspicion, anger, amusement. Their bodies display the same physical traits that mark us as human, just adapted to a radically different lifestyle. In many ways, looking at the Sentinelese is like looking into a mirror that reflects our distant past. They represent not a culture frozen in time, but rather a different path that human development could have taken, one not defined by agriculture, industry, and technology, but by a continued intimate relationship with the natural world. So, what exactly do we know about Sentinelese culture? Frustratingly little. Everything we understand comes from brief glimpses, aerial surveys, rare peaceful encounters, and objects left behind when they flee into the forest. It's like trying to understand a movie by looking at a handful of still frames. We see fragments, but miss the full picture. Let's start with their appearance. The Sentinelese belong to the broader category of Andamanese peoples, sometimes called Negritos. Due to their dark skin and short stature, they stand between 5'3" and 5'5" on average, with powerful, lean physiques shaped by a lifetime of physical activity. Their skin is extremely dark, described by some observers as shining black, likely an adaptation to the intense tropical sun. Their hair is typically short and tightly curled. What's most striking is what they don't wear. Unlike virtually every other human society, the Sentinelese wear almost no clothing. Men typically wear only a narrow belt around the waist, often with a piece of string or fiber hanging down in front as a minimal covering. Women wear similar belts or small bark string skirts. Both sexes sometimes adorn themselves with necklaces, headbands, and wristbands made from plant fibers. But don't mistake their near-nakedness for a lack of adornment. The Sentinelese decorate their bodies in other ways. They've been observed wearing necklaces made from shell, bone, and other natural materials. Some photographs show them with what appears to be ochre or other pigments applied to their skin, possibly for decoration, sun protection, or insect repellent. Their tools and weapons reveal an astonishing ingenuity despite their limited resources. The bow is their signature weapon, a flat, powerful design made from a flexible wood found on the island. Unlike the curved bows familiar to us, Sentinelese bows are straight when unstrung, becoming curved only when the string is attached. These bows are remarkably effective, capable of launching arrows with enough force to penetrate deep into targets. The arrows themselves are fascinating. Long shafts of wood tipped with points that have evolved over time. In the 1800s, they were already using metal-tipped arrows, likely fashioned from whatever washed ashore. After shipwrecks like the Primrose provided more metal, Their arrowheads became more sophisticated. They craft different types for different purposes: broadheads for hunting, narrow barbed points for fishing, and others possibly designed specifically for warfare or defense. Beyond bows and arrows, they use simple harpoons for fishing and spearing turtles. They craft knives or daggers from salvaged metal, which men carry tucked into their waist belts, a precarious arrangement considering their lack of clothing. Stone tools like adzes are used for woodworking and other heavy tasks. Their homes reflect their mobile, adaptable lifestyle. Rather than permanent structures, they build temporary shelters that can be abandoned or rebuilt as needed. The basic design is simple but effective: 4 poles supporting a slanted, leaf-thatched roof. Some dwellings are completely open-sided, while others might have partial walls for wind protection. These shelters cluster in small settlements, usually set back from the beach in the forest's edge. What's particularly fascinating is what they don't have. No pottery has ever been observed. They likely use coconut shells, leaves, and woven baskets for containers. No evidence of agriculture exists, not even the most basic crop cultivation. And unlike many indigenous peoples, they don't appear to make or use canoes for deep water fishing or travel. Their narrow outriggers are used only in shallow waters and propelled with poles rather than paddles. This technological simplicity is entirely by choice, not limitation. The Sentinelese clearly have the intelligence and adaptability to incorporate useful elements from outside, as evidenced by their ready adoption of metal. They simply haven't needed or wanted more complex technology for their lifestyle. Their language remains one of their greatest mysteries. Linguists haven't recorded or analyzed a single word of Sentinelese. When members of the Onge tribe, fellow Andamanese with possibly related languages, accompanied contact expeditions, they couldn't understand the Sentinelese language at all. This linguistic isolation is profound. While most isolated tribes speak languages related to their neighbors, the Sentinelese language appears to have developed in complete isolation for thousands of years. Imagine the unique words, concepts, and linguistic structures that might exist in such a language. A tongue untouched by outside influence, shaped solely by the experience of life on one small island. How do they communicate among themselves? Probably much as we do, through speech, facial expressions, gestures, and body language. During the rare peaceful encounters, anthropologists noted they seemed to have clear leadership structures, certain individuals who did most of the talking and decision-making. Their social organization remains largely speculative, based on other hunter-gatherer societies and limited observations. Anthropologists believe they likely live in band-level social groups, collections of related families who hunt and gather together. Leadership probably comes from experience and ability rather than formal hierarchy. Family structure likely revolves around nuclear families, parents and their children within the larger community. Children appear to enjoy considerable freedom, learning through observation and play rather than formal instruction. Gender roles almost certainly exist, with men focusing on hunting and defense while women gather plant foods and care for young children, a division of labor common in hunter-gatherer societies worldwide. What about their inner lives, their beliefs, spirituality, and worldview? Here we enter the realm of pure speculation. No outsider has ever witnessed Sentinelese religious practices or learned about their cosmology, but we can make educated guesses based on universal human patterns. All human societies develop explanations for natural phenomena: birth, death, and their place in the world. The Sentinelese almost certainly have creation stories, beliefs about what happens after death, and rituals to mark important life events. They may practice animism, the belief that natural objects, phenomena, and the universe itself possess a soul or consciousness, as do many hunter-gatherer peoples. We know they bury their dead. In 2006, after killing 2 fishermen who drifted to their shore, they were observed burying the bodies on the beach. This suggests they treat human remains with some form of ritual respect. Some anthropologists have noted what appear to be decorative elements placed on graves, though details remain frustratingly vague. Do they have art? Almost certainly. Artistic expression appears in every human culture studied. The geometric designs observed on some of their weapons suggest aesthetic considerations beyond pure functionality. They likely have music as well, possibly drums, rattles, or other percussion instruments made from natural materials. Dance is one cultural element we've actually observed. During rare peaceful encounters in the 1990s, Sentinelese women were seen performing a dance that involved slapping both palms on the thighs while simultaneously tapping the feet rhythmically in a bent knee stance. This rhythmic movement, performed for outsiders, might be part of welcoming ceremonies or could have been an improvised response to the unusual situation. Their relationship with time likely differs dramatically from ours. Without written records, calendars, or clocks, they probably mark time by natural cycles, the phases of the moon, seasonal changes, tides, and weather patterns. Their history exists only in oral tradition, stories passed down through generations, perhaps changing with each telling. How do they understand themselves in relation to the outside world? Do they believe they're the only humans? Do they have myths about where outsiders come from? These questions may never be answered, but their consistent hostility suggests they view the outside world primarily as a threat. Uayurikro destaur, a viewer confirmed by their limited historical experience with outsiders. What about knowledge transmission? Without writing, everything the Sentinelese know, from bow-making techniques to medicinal plants to their creation myths, must be passed orally from one generation to the next. This creates both limitations and strengths. Knowledge can be lost if its holders die before passing it on, but what survives is often deeply integrated into daily life and practice. Their medical knowledge is particularly fascinating to consider. Without modern medicine, they've developed their own treatments for illness and injury. These likely include herbal remedies, physical therapies like massage or bone setting, and possibly ritualistic or spiritual healing practices. Whatever their methods, they've been effective enough to maintain a healthy, reproducing population for thousands of years. Pregnancy and childbirth happen without hospitals, doctors, or modern equipment. Women likely give birth with the assistance of experienced older women, using positions and techniques passed down through generations. Infant mortality is almost certainly higher than in modern societies, but enough children survive to maintain their population. The most remarkable aspect of Sentinelese culture might be its sustainability. For thousands of years, they've lived on a tiny island without depleting its resources. They've maintained a population in balance with their environment, never taking more than can be naturally replenished. Their footprint on the island is so light that aerial surveys struggle to find evidence of their settlements among the dense forest. This sustainability isn't achieved through advanced environmental science, but through cultural practices evolved over countless generations. They've developed taboos, restrictions, and seasonal patterns that prevent overhunting, overfishing, or overuse of plant resources. Their cultural knowledge contains the wisdom of thousands of years of trial and error on their island home. This raises profound ethical questions about our relationship with the Sentinelese. Is their way of life something to be protected at all costs, or does isolation condemn them to preventable suffering should modern medicine, education, and technology be available to them? Or would these inevitably destroy the unique culture they've maintained? These aren't simple questions. Other Andamanese groups who've been brought into modern society have suffered catastrophic population decline, loss of cultural identity, and social problems like alcoholism and dependency, yet they also gained access to medical care, longer lifespans, and wider opportunities. What right do we have to make these choices for the Sentinelese? What right do we have to study them when they've made it abundantly clear they want no contact? The very act of observation changes what's being observed, a paradox anthropologists have struggled with for decades. Some argue that the Sentinelese deserve the opportunity to join the global community, to benefit from modern medicine, technology, and knowledge. Others contend that forced contact would be a form of cultural genocide, destroying one of the last examples of an alternative way of being human. The Indian government has taken the position that the tribe's wishes should be respected. They've established a hands-off policy, monitoring from a distance to ensure the Sentinelese are surviving but not attempting further contact. This approach recognizes both the tribe's autonomy and their extreme vulnerability to outside diseases and exploitation. When we look at the Sentinelese, we're not seeing living fossils or remnants of the Stone Age. We're seeing a contemporary human society that has chosen a different path, one defined not by technological progress, but by equilibrium with their environment. Their culture isn't primitive, it's perfectly adapted to their specific circumstances. In many ways, the Sentinelese challenge our notion of progress. They've achieved something most modern societies struggle with, a sustainable way of life that can continue indefinitely without depleting natural resources. Their apparent good health, strong social bonds, and cultural resilience raise uncomfortable questions about what we've sacrificed in our race toward technological advancement. Of course, we shouldn't romanticize their existence. Life on North Sentinel Island involves hardships most of us would find intolerable: high infant mortality, vulnerability to weather and natural disasters, limited protection from disease and injury, and a constant struggle for survival. Their isolation also means they lack access to the accumulated knowledge, art, science, and diversity of human experience that enriches our lives. Yet there's something profound in their continued existence, a reminder that human societies can take radically different forms and still thrive in a world racing toward homogeneity, where the same brands, technologies, and cultural products appear everywhere, from New York to New Delhi. The Sentinelese represent genuine diversity, not just in their genetics or language, but in their entire way of being human. As we've learned about their material culture, social organization, and potential beliefs, one thing becomes clear: the Sentinelese aren't relics of the past, but our contemporaries, living a parallel present that few of us can imagine. Their culture isn't frozen in time. It's evolving along its own path, responding to changes in their environment and the occasional intrusions from our world. This brings us to our final consideration. What does the future hold for the world's most isolated tribe? Can their extraordinary isolation continue in our increasingly connected world? And what responsibility do we bear toward these fellow humans who want nothing to do with us? The morning sun rises over North Sentinel Island, just as it has for tens of thousands of mornings before. A Sentinelese man stands on the beach, scanning the horizon. What does he see? Does he notice the world changing around him? Does he sense that his people's extraordinary isolation faces challenges unlike any they've encountered before? The future of the Sentinelese balances on a knife edge. Their continued isolation isn't guaranteed. It depends on decisions made not by them, but by the outside world they've rejected, and those decisions grow more complex every year. The most immediate threat comes from the sea surrounding them. Climate change is raising ocean levels worldwide, and low-lying islands like North Sentinel are particularly vulnerable. The 2004 tsunami already dramatically altered their shoreline, destroying fishing grounds and changing the island's topography. Future sea level rise could shrink their already limited territory, potentially forcing them into greater dependency on the outside world. Warming oceans also mean more frequent and intense cyclones, a serious threat to an island community with simple shelters and no evacuation options. What happens if a devastating storm hits North Sentinel Island? Would the Indian government intervene to provide aid, breaking the tribe's isolation? Or would they respect the Sentinelese's autonomy even in a catastrophe? Then there's the human factor. Despite legal protections and known dangers, people continue to approach the island illegally. Fishermen venture into the exclusion zone seeking rich fishing grounds. Poachers hunt in the waters around the island, endangering both marine life and potentially exposing the tribe to contact. Missionaries like John Allen Chow feel called to bring their faith to this unreached people. Adventure tourists and social media influencers seek exotic thrills and viral content. Each intrusion increases the risk of disease transmission, potentially catastrophic for a small population with limited genetic diversity and no immunity to common outside illnesses. A single encounter with an infected visitor could unleash an epidemic that could decimate or even wipe out the entire tribe. This isn't far-fetched speculation. It's precisely what happened to countless indigenous groups throughout history. When Europeans first contacted Native Americans, diseases like smallpox and measles killed an estimated 90% of the population. More recently, when gold miners made contact with the isolated Yanomami in Brazil, a measles outbreak killed 20% of the tribe. Even seemingly mild illnesses can prove devastating to isolated populations. A common cold or flu, inconvenient for us but rarely life-threatening, could sweep through the Sentinelese with deadly efficiency. Their small population means they likely lack the genetic diversity that helps larger populations survive disease outbreaks. The experience of other Andamanese tribes offers a stark warning. The Great Andamanese, who once numbered in the thousands across 10 distinct tribes, were reduced to fewer than 100 individuals after contact with British colonizers. Disease, exploitation, and cultural disruption decimated them. Today, only about 50 remain, living on government support, their traditional lifestyle and many of their languages lost forever. The Jarawa tribe offers an even more relevant case study. Like the Sentinelese, they fiercely resisted outside contact for decades, but when a highway was built through their territory in the 1970s, gradual contact became inevitable. By the 1990s, they began emerging from the forest to seek food and goods from settlers. The results have been profoundly troubling. Today, the Jarawa face sexual exploitation, alcohol addiction, and dependence on handouts. Tourists pay for human safaris where they throw food to Jarawa by the roadside. Disease outbreaks are common. Their population remains vulnerable and their cultural integrity is increasingly threatened. Is this the inevitable future for the Sentinelese if their isolation ends, or could contact be managed in ways that protect both their physical health and cultural autonomy? Some argue for a controlled contact approach, gradual, carefully managed interaction that introduces modern medicine and technology while preserving cultural practices and independence. Proponents point to tribes like the Ache in Paraguay, who transitioned from isolation to limited integration while maintaining many aspects of their traditional culture. But critics counter that once contact begins, the process becomes impossible to control. Power imbalances, economic pressures, and the seductive appeal of outside goods inevitably transform indigenous societies, often not for the better. The history of colonial contact is littered with good intentions that paved the road to cultural extinction. The Indian government's current approach, a strict no-contact policy with monitoring from a distance, attempts to thread this difficult needle. They recognize both the tribe's right to self-determination and their extreme vulnerability. Periodic aerial surveys confirm the Sentinelese are surviving without showing signs of population decline or distress. If that changed, if clear evidence emerged of an existential threat to the tribe, the policy might be reconsidered. But this hands-off approach faces growing criticism from multiple directions. Human rights advocates argue that all people deserve access to modern medicine and education, that isolation condemns the Sentinelese to preventable suffering and early death. Religious groups see a population unreached by their faith. Development advocates point to the material poverty of the tribe's existence. Against these voices stand indigenous rights organizations, anthropologists, and ethicists who emphasize the tribe's clearly expressed desire for isolation and their right to determine their own future. They argue that forced contact, even with benevolent intentions, represents a form of cultural imperialism, imposing outside values on a society that has rejected them. The Sentinelese themselves, of course, have no voice in this debate. They can't speak at UN forums on indigenous rights or write opinion pieces in international newspapers. Their only means of expression has been arrows fired at approaching boats and helicopters, a clear message that requires no translation. Behind these practical concerns lie deeper philosophical questions. The Sentinelese challenge our fundamental assumptions about human progress and happiness. Can a society without writing, electricity, or modern medicine be considered successful? By what standards should we judge their quality of life? Material measures clearly place them among the world's poorest populations. They possess almost nothing that modern economies value. No money, no property, no technology. Yet, from the limited observations we have, they appear physically healthy, socially cohesive, and culturally robust. Their isolation has protected them from many modern afflictions: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, addiction, and the psychological distress that often accompanies rapid cultural change. Perhaps most remarkably, they've achieved something that increasingly eludes the rest of humanity: genuine sustainability. For thousands of years, they've lived on their island without depleting its resources. Their population remains in balance with their environment. They take only what they need and leave minimal trace of their presence. In our era of climate crisis and environmental degradation, there's a certain irony in labeling such a society primitive or undeveloped. Perhaps they've developed exactly what they need, a way of life that could theoretically continue indefinitely without destroying the natural systems that support it. This isn't to romanticize their existence. Life on North Sentinel Island involves hardships most of us would find intolerable: limited protection from the elements, vulnerability to injury and disease, constant physical labor, and restricted horizons. They lack access to the accumulated knowledge, art, medicine, and diversity of experience that enriches our lives. Yet their continued existence raises uncomfortable questions about what we've sacrificed in our rush toward technological progress and global connectivity. As the outside world grows increasingly homogenized, the same brands, technologies, and cultural products appearing everywhere from Boston to Beijing, the Sentinelese represent something increasingly rare: genuine diversity, not just in genetics or language, but in ways of being human. This makes their isolation valuable, not just to them, but potentially to all of us. They're a living reminder that human societies can take radically different forms and still thrive. They preserve knowledge, practices, and possibly language structures that exist nowhere else on Earth. Once lost, this diversity can never be recovered. Some anthropologists compare uncontacted tribes to endangered species, unique, irreplaceable, and worthy of protection not just for their own sake but for the biological and cultural diversity they contribute to our world. Others find this comparison problematic, arguing that it dehumanizes indigenous peoples and treats them as specimens rather than autonomous human beings with rights. The debate extends to how we should think about North Sentinel Island itself. Is it a living museum preserving a way of life that has vanished elsewhere? A prison confining its inhabitants to a limited existence? A sanctuary protecting the Sentinelese from the disruptions that have devastated other indigenous peoples? Or simply a homeland, neither better nor worse than any other, just different? Our answer shapes how we approach the future of the Sentinelese. If we see their island as a museum, we might prioritize preserving their traditional lifestyle above all else. If we see it as a prison, we might feel obligated to liberate them through contact and integration. If we see it as a sanctuary, we might focus on strengthening the protections that maintain their isolation. But if we see North Sentinel Island simply as their homeland, a place where a distinct human society has the right to continue its own unique development, then our primary obligation becomes respecting their clearly expressed desire to be left alone, while remaining vigilant against threats to their existence that they cannot address themselves. This seems to be the approach favored by most indigenous rights organizations and the current Indian administration. Rather than making paternalistic decisions about what's best for the Sentinelese, this stance recognizes their agency and autonomy, even when exercised in ways that puzzle or disturb outsiders. Of course, maintaining this delicate balance grows more challenging every year. Tourism to the Andaman Islands increases annually. Fishing pressure in the surrounding waters continues to rise. Climate change advances regardless of exclusion zones or legal protections. The modern world presses closer to North Sentinel Island with each passing day. Yet, somehow, against all odds, the Sentinelese have maintained their extraordinary isolation into the 21st century, while virtually every other society on Earth has been absorbed into global networks of trade, communication, and cultural exchange. They remain apart by choice and by circumstance. How much longer can this continue? 50 years? 100? 500? The honest answer is that we don't know. What seems certain is that their future, like their past, will be shaped by the delicate interplay between their own fierce independence and the outside world's actions and decisions. If their isolation does eventually end through disaster, necessity, or outside intervention, something unique and irreplaceable will be lost. Not just a way of life, but a possibility. The possibility that human societies can chart radically different courses and still endure. For now, the morning sun continues to rise over North Sentinel Island. The Sentinelese man on the beach returns to his settlement, unaware of the debates surrounding his people's future, unaware that millions around the world know of his existence, yet know almost nothing about him. His day unfolds according to patterns established over countless generations: hunting, gathering, tool-making, child-rearing, storytelling. His concerns are immediate and tangible: finding food, maintaining shelter, raising children, participating in community life. The abstractions that consume us, economic growth, technological advancement, global connectivity, have no place in his reality. And perhaps there's wisdom in that focus, a directness of experience increasingly rare in our mediated virtual world. The Sentinelese live fully embedded in the physical reality of their island home, their relationships unfiltered by screens or social media, their understanding of the world shaped by direct observation and oral tradition rather than the flood of information and misinformation that washes over the rest of us daily. Their isolation has given them something precious, a world that makes sense on a human scale. Their island is knowable in a way our global society increasingly isn't. The causes and effects that shape their lives are visible, traceable, comprehensible. Actions have clear consequences. Relationships are immediate and real. This doesn't make their existence superior to ours, just profoundly different, and in that difference lies their value, both to themselves and to our collective human heritage. They remind us that our way isn't the only way, that the path most of humanity has taken toward technological advancement and global integration represents just one possibility among many. As the sun sets on North Sentinel Island, fires glow in small clearings. Perhaps stories are told, songs sung, dances performed. Cultural practices that have evolved over thousands of years continue, unknown to outsiders. The Sentinelese sleep under the same stars that shine above us all, sharing our common humanity while living a reality almost unimaginably different from our own. Their isolation is their choice, their future is their right, and their existence reminds us that human ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience can thrive in the most extraordinary circumstances, a testament to the diverse ways of being human that have sustained our species through countless generations on this shared planet. Long may they endure, on their own terms, on their island home,